Happy Adopt a Listener Month, the latest from our free daily newsletter at podnews.net. If we want the podcast industry to grow, says Tink Media, we need to turn those non-podcast listeners into podcast listeners. They have audio and scripts for your podcast to help. You'll hear one today, a little later. Spotify for Podcasters has increased its share in March to 23.1% of all new episodes, a 6-month high for the podcast host formerly known as Anchor. Spotify's Megaphone also published an all-time high, and at number 3, iHeart's Spreaker saw a dramatic increase, possibly due to their misleading announcement last month that the platform was now free, even if it was just a small tweak on already existing free accounts. Buzzsprout remains at number 2. Open podcast tracking tool OP3 also grew its share of tracked episodes by 11% last month, and Amazon CloudFront remains the most used CDN. All that data worked out by John Spurlock for March, during which there were 1.9 million podcast episodes, lasting more than 130 years, and taking more than 71 terabytes of storage. Spotify is claiming the company now has 5.3 million podcasts, which is interesting because in October, the company claimed 5.5 million podcasts. YouTube will globally roll out a new podcast tab in its main YouTube app this week. The tab lists all podcasts owned by that particular channel. We've screen grabs in our show notes and our newsletter at podnews.net. Here's a tip for you. Since podcasts are available globally on the main YouTube app, you're better off saying, listen to our podcast on YouTube, rather than specifically mentioning YouTube Music. Podcasts in there are only available in the US. Eric Newsom has published his speaking notes from a 7-minute speech at Radio Days Europe about the challenges for the industry over the next 12 months. He spoke about market saturation. I also spoke. My topic was about keeping podcasting open. And that's linked too from our show notes and our newsletter at podnews.net, as well as a story from Czech Radio where Ariel Nissenblatt gets prime placement. Podgenie is a new service that turns any RSS feed into a podcast. It pulls multiple feeds together into just one show. Pricing starts at $10 a month. Podcast Brunch Club, like Book Club, but for podcasts, published its April playlist focusing on scams. And in our Corner of Doom today, Vanity Fair published a piece on the end of podcasting's boom, while Paramount is slowing down its podcast production launch pace, according to Digiday. It's a Monday, so time for some tech stuff. Now that transcripts are part of the recommendation by the Podcast Standards Project, a new library called Transcriptator has been published, which parses transcripts for your app. If anybody wants a 50-hour podcast episode to test their player on, we've got a link in our show notes and our newsletter at podnews.net. Cross-app comments are now available on the Podcast Index website. We support them too, but we see few comments yet anyway for this show. In the Podcasting 2.0 board meeting this week, Dave Jones is ill again. Get well soon, Dave. We learn that Fountain is the most used app for boosts, except for live shows. And we hear Adam's views on the Podcast Standards Project, who he sees as welcome diplomats in the attack on proprietary podcasting. And why should you support alternate enclosures? Because if you do, podcast hosts, you could save up to 87.5% of your bandwidth bills. That's according to a little article by me. It's a response to Blueberry's Todd Cochran. And in podcast news, Podnews' Sam Sethi is highlighted in the latest Mere Mortals. You can expect discussions on participating actively during the birth of the internet, how digital money will change the world, his focus when creating podfans, why he's going all in on the value for value model, technology he thinks will be important in the next 10 years, and books and people he finds fascinating. And Lindsey Graham sounded a little different on Saturday's History Daily, probably because it was actor Ryan Reynolds instead. He's a fan, listening every day. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.
Hi. Do you know someone who has never listened to a podcast?
It might sound bananas to you and me, but those people are out there.
If we want the podcast industry to grow, we need more listeners. That's why this April, Tink Media is launching Adopt a Listener Month.
We're asking you to find someone who says,
Podcasts are my thing.
And give them a thoughtful recommendation to change their mind, something that will get them hooked.
Go to tinkmedia.co/adopt to sign up, find resources, and learn how you can get involved.